Today we're going to replace the window regulator in this 1991 BMW 750iL. It's got a very strange failure that I haven't seen before. Essentially the pivot pin has worn away the metal housing around it, so the window will only close if you push it up against the side. Otherwise it only gets to about 2 centimeters from the top and then stops. Very easy to do this. Essentially we're going to be removing some of the nuts holding the regulator assembly. 1, 2, 3, and 4. Alright, 3 of them have been removed. I've left the top one in so that it holds in place. The next thing to do is to remove these connectors and the wiring as well. This will be disconnecting from the regulator assembly. At the very bottom you have a plug that connects to the motor itself here. I've already removed it. The wire is held in place with a zip tie that we're simply going to cut. Obviously, easier said than done with your left hand. There you go. That's removed. Now the wiring should all be free and easy to remove. That's going to make my life a lot easier in a minute. So this part was connected to the top plug, the black one there. It went through into this connector. That's been removed. Now I'm going to remove the last nut, and then we're going to play around trying to get it out of the window opening. Okay, so the tricky part here is to essentially line up the pin there comes out of the opening here, and then at the back you have this little slider that goes into the rail here. So you have to slide it out of the rail, and then essentially you're going to be sliding it towards the inside of the car, and then the whole assembly is loose. Pull it out, and there we go. And then I'm going to install my replacement one that I have here. That one came from my parts car. I'm going to add a little bit of grease to the sliders there and there. One problem that you can run into is if the old and the new regulator were not in the same position where they were removed, which is the problem that I'm having right now. In a nutshell, I guess the one from the parts car was properly closing, the one from this grey car was not closing. So you can see, if I line up the 2 armatures, the left arm is not at all in the same place. So that's going to prevent me from putting in the regulator as it sits. It's not a huge problem. It just means that I have to actuate the motor a little bit with my power supply in order to get it to move. So I'm going to do that now. In order to fix it, nothing complicated. I've got my power supply here hooked up. Not a very big one, I think 2 or 2.5 amps. So I've put the 2 regulators on top of each other, pretty much in the same position. I'm going to compare the arms. So in order to fix that, I'm just going to touch the plug a little bit. Now this one doesn't have very much voltage, so the motor is just kind of stepping, which is actually fine by me because it gives me a lot finer control. There we go. So I think we're pretty much in the right spot now, and I'm going to be able to reinstall it. Okay, replacement one is put into the door here. I've greased the 2 slider pins with white lithium grease. So this pin here, or this slider here, is going to go into the rail here, and then the other slider here is going to go into a much smaller rail, which you can see right there. These will slide in from the front back, so I'll have to line up both and then essentially push it up. Alright, so there we go. The new one is installed. I guess the new used one is installed. So I slid the back pin in there, and the front pin is in its guide as well. It's a little bit tricky to get those 2 aligned at the same time. Essentially you want to make sure that your pins here for the regulator assembly are not in their respective holes. It gives you a bit more flexibility. You line them up, and then once that's done, you'll have to play with the motor a little bit. See, there's a lot of resistance here. I'll have to play with the motor a little bit to allow me to line up the pins. Alright, so we're all installed. The 4 nuts have been installed there. 1, 2, 3, and 4. You'll notice that my window now has a bit of a gap. The tape marks on it are obviously because of the old broken regulator. It was open, it was left open for some time, so there's tape on there to prevent the elements from getting in. This nut here is a bit of an adjustment one. You see it has kind of a oblong opening, so you can use it to adjust the orientation of the window. I don't know if this window is straight yet. The car electrical system is completely disconnected, so I don't really have any ability to test it per se, other than plugging in my power supply, which is what I'm going to do next. I just want to make sure that the window goes up and down in an even and aligned fashion. I don't want it to go up more at the back or at the front. That would not be good. So I'm going to try that with the power supply, and if that works, then we're pretty much done. so here we are, finally, after a lot of clicking and poor motor having to struggle a little bit. We got the window put up. So you can see here, it's ugly, not quite closed. And here, unfortunately, I have a bit more of a gap. So it looks like I need to adjust it so that the front part of the window is going to go up a little bit and the rear will stay where it is. So I'll have to undo the back nut here, and then I'll have to adjust the arm down to fix that. All right, so there we are. We've adjusted it. As you can see, the nut is now a little bit further down than it was the first time I tightened it down. The others have all been tightened down. I've plugged in the motor controls there. Sorry, the sensor controls rather. I'm going to disconnect my little power supply, connect up the motor. Don't forget the original, or in this case non-original, BMW zip tie that's going to have to go in there as well. There we go, plugged in. And that's it for this mission. Now I'm just going to reinstall the door panel, and hopefully this will be ready to go once I finish essentially overhauling all the engine, the gearbox, and everything else in the car, and try to put it back together. Some of you may have noticed that this pivot pin here is different from the pivot pin that was there originally. So I suspect you can see there's a bracket for it and some marks around it. So I think that the spring that was around it that helps hold this pin in place is gone. And that's what caused this regulator here to fail altogether. Visually, mechanically, it doesn't seem to be any difference between that one and the one I've just installed. The car, like I said, is a 1991. This regulator here came from my 1988, very early 1988 production 750 parts car, but it doesn't seem like that part was updated at any point in the production run, so it looks like any of these E32 regulators can be interchangeable.